EDAS Covid Conversations. This is very much an opportunity for members to share different perspectives and reflect on the response to the impact of the pandemic. After the last event, the feedback we got was that you would welcome the chance to reflect on the emerging lessons that are being learned and practical ideas for recovery. So this is going to be the focus of this conversation this morning. The feedback was also that we should try and provide more opportunities for engagement and exchange. So we're going to experiment with using the live Q&A using the raise hand function. And we're also going to experiment with the Zoom breakout rooms. And you'll notice that I put the emphasis on the word experiment twice there. So we're trying this out to try and get as much engagement as possible. Last time we looked at things from the perspective of different types of organization. This time we're going to look at matters through different areas of focus. We've got a panel to offer us some initial thoughts from their perspective to get started. The areas we're going to focus on are skills and employability with Taylor Stewart, rural economy with Stuart Black in the panel, urban and town centres with Phil Prentice, and small business with Susan Love. And I should acknowledge that we probably could have got the gender balance of that panel a bit better, but we'll try and do better as we go along. After the panel introductions, we're going to have a short Q&A with using either the chat as we did last time or the raised hand function, and I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get there. And then we'll break into breakout rooms where the panelists will host smaller discussions on each of the themes that they're leading, with the two key questions, I suppose, being what have we learned during the initial response phase, and what practical ideas seem promising for the recovery and the restart phase. And then we'll try and identify 2 or 3 key points in each group and bring them back to the wider group. So that's the sort of schedule for the day. We plan to finish by 11:15, and before we do conclude, I'll also say a little bit about what our ideas are for future conversations, and I think Alison's got a quick poll organised to give us some information about future EDAS activities. So that's the order of running for the day. Alison, do you want to give a few technical briefing points before we start?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Charlie. Charlie's already went through quite a lot of what we're planning for today, but in terms of technology, if you're logging in on your computer, you're more than welcome to chat along with any comments or question using the chat box, which you'll find at the bottom menu. You can also raise your hands during the Q&A. You'll find the raise hand function if you click participants, and there's a raise hand icon there. If you're dialing in, you can email me any comments or questions on alison@edas.org.uk. And if you have signed up for the breakout rooms, it should be easy enough. Once we get there, I'll click a button and off you'll go to your breakout rooms. If you haven't yet signed up, just stay in the main session and I'll talk you through and get you assigned to a breakout. After the breakout rooms, we'll return into the main room for a small in-house poll and feeding back from the breakouts. I think that's me, Charlie.
All right, great stuff. Thank you very much. Any questions? And I see there was one already about somebody who couldn't hear properly at the beginning. So any questions, put them, technical issues, put it in the chat function, and Alison will try and help you there. Okay, so brief panel introductions to get us going. We're going to kick off with the skills and employability theme. Taylor Stewart, who's an EDAS board member, has been involved in this area of activity for a number of years now. Is going to kick us off there. So, Taylor, can I invite you to give your thoughts?
Great, thanks, Charlie. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I've reflected on this. I guess I'll be the same as everybody else in terms of what's happened over the last sort of 8-10 weeks since the start of lockdown. what this means for ourselves, for our families, work colleagues and friends. So in terms of these reflections around skills and employability, I've got a number of observations that I hope will contribute and help with the wider discussions over the next hour or so, as Charlie's outlined there. So my sort of observations focus on two areas: the impact on individuals and then also the impact on businesses from a skills and employability perspective. So I've just got a number of points I'm going to work through here just to sort of hopefully prompt some thoughts and then discussions later on. In terms of the impact on individuals, thinking about how this is going to impact on current and future employment and training opportunities, this is going to be significant and will require different responses for different situations. I work with Skills Development Scotland as well as being a board member with EDAS, and a real focus of ourselves is on young people. So thinking in terms of what young people are facing just now, whether they're leaving school, college, university, or moving up through the senior phase at school, what are the next steps going to be for themselves, and how could they be effectively supported through that process? We also know that there's different groups of individuals and households are going to be impacted in different ways. And from an employability perspective, one of the things that I've picked up is the most sort of vulnerable young people across the country, and how, due to the lockdown measures, they're being excluded from a digital perspective. And I think when you combine that, and rightly so, with a drive to deliver more digital learning, again from schools, colleges, training providers, how's this going to compound some of the challenges that the more vulnerable young people are going to face in the coming months and years? We're all aware of the mental health impact, both in the short term, but what's that impact going to be like over the medium to the long term? We've also seen significant increases in claims for universal credit across the country. And reflecting back on some earlier figures, in the 2-week period to the 7th of April in Scotland, new claims for UC increased by 61,000. So obviously significant impact and challenges around that. And finally, in terms of from an individual's perspective, I think it's also interesting to think about the impact on different groups. We've touched on young people, but what about those individuals who are low earners, lone parents, females with caring responsibilities, minority ethnic groups, and disabled people? So hopefully that sort of prompts some thinking there from an individual perspective. Then having a think about from the business perspective, and specifically to some of the sectors within Scotland that we're obviously facing some significant skills challenges. And there's a number of sectors that I wanted just to pull out to sort of highlight and some of the challenges that they're facing. And other colleagues may well touch on this morning. Stuart probably specifically from a rural dimension, but accommodation, food services within tourism, education, arts, entertainment and recreation, they've been significantly impacted with the social distancing measures. And what do we need to think about in terms of supporting these businesses when the lockdown measures start to ease? Manufacturing has been impacted with higher absence rates, and also challenges around the labour market and shortages there. Public administration and defence, there's a high proportion of females employed in these sectors, and they are providing childcare for their dependents, so there's an impact there as well. And then broader administration and support services. You get health and social work, which is obviously well documented in terms of the impact, and then other service sectors, again, a high proportion of females being employed, and also existing labour market shortages. We're also hearing on a daily basis of significant job losses, and we need to start thinking about how we can support these individuals as well as the businesses. Most recent one that I've just pulled out is in terms of OVO Energy, which has got operations across Scotland, and estimates are saying that we're likely to lose 1,000 jobs in Scotland from this one company. So I guess just in summary, from the points I've made, there is a large degree of uncertainty, and we don't know yet if it's going to take years for the economy to recover to the pre-pandemic levels, like it was after the financial crisis in 2008, or are we going to see things bounce back a bit quicker? What we do know is that the support of the public sector and the third sector should be rapid and high quality. This could take many forms, but based on the recovery from previous recessions, this is critical. And then finally, how do we ensure that we continue to focus on fair work and also inclusive growth as part of any recovery programme that's going to be implemented?
Okay.
That's me.
Thank you very much, Ted. It's got us off to a great start. I'm going to move straight over now to the second section. That's Stuart on the rural dimension to this.
Okay, good morning everyone, Matt and Van. I'm going to talk about three things this morning just to kick off the discussion in the working group later. Challenges facing rural Scotland, opportunities, and then lastly policy responses. Firstly, just to remind ourselves that rural Scotland makes up 20% of the population of the country. These are people living in small towns and rural areas and sometimes remote locations such as islands. But rural Scotland has a disproportionate impact on the overall economy, accounting for 27% of output. And when you think about some of our important export industries, not just at Scottish level, but also UK, and biggest export food and drink is obviously whisky, but followed closely by salmon. And these are things that are produced largely in rural Scotland. There are some structural differences in rural economies which impact. For example, people in remote areas, remote rural areas, are twice as likely to be self-employed, and they're also twice as likely to have a second job. So there's often a degree of multiple occupations working in remote locations in particular. Key sectors in the rural economy have been affected quite disproportionately by the COVID crisis. Obviously, primary industries, in some industries there's been an increase in output, in agriculture for example. The food and drink sector is also very important to rural areas, and while some production has increased, there's also been big impacts, particularly from the loss of food service in the tourism and accommodation sector. Construction tends to be more important in rural economies, along with the public sector, and most notably at the moment tourism. And we've seen some stark figures in the tourist sector dealing with things like the Hardship Fund and the Pivotal Enterprise Fund, businesses with no income at all, and actually talking about the 16-month winter. Most tourism businesses make their money between March and September, and if they're not able to trade in that period, then they really can't survive through the long winter months, because tourism still is relatively seasonal for many businesses. So the Fraser-Vallender Institute in March, in one of its earlier pieces on the impact of the crisis in Scotland, did say that there was a disproportionate effect in rural areas because of the level of small and medium-sized enterprises and the self-employed. So it's easy to get quite gloomy about the situation at the current time, and we're dealing with real crisis situations for a lot of businesses in rural Scotland. But there are also some opportunities and some issues that I think are being driven home in terms of the advantages of working and living in a rural community. For example, we're all getting used to working at home and working remotely, but for many rural businesses, this has been a way of life for many years. 4G and rural broadband has helped make a difference. And I'm speaking to you today from rural Speyside. I was on a call the other day with someone in Berlin and someone in the north of Norway. Actually, the person in Berlin had the poorest quality broadband because so many people were using it. So rural areas do have an advantage in terms of the ability to work remotely. And probably it's best illustrated through University of Highlands and Islands. Every other university in the UK is changing to an online environment, and UHI has been doing this for 10 years or more. So there are some sectors in the rural economy that are used to working this way. A second opportunity is the importance of local food supply and the value that people see in purchasing local produce, using local bakeries, using local butchers. A lot of that's come to the fore now through the crisis, and hopefully some of that will stick around. A third advantage or a third opportunity in rural areas is the level of community cohesion and the role of the voluntary sector and the social economy. Now, High's been involved, I work with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, we've been involved in community resilience funding, and we put out almost £3 million to organisations across the Highlands and Islands who are working at a very local level responding to the crisis. So there's strong community spirit and community action in rural areas, and that's again an opportunity for the future. And then lastly, obviously, it's a really dreadful time for the tourism industry at the moment. However, in the medium term, there's hope that more visitors will actually holiday in their own country and get to know different parts of the country. So there's, particularly if people are less keen to go on flights, then there is potential for more people to be holidaying in Scotland and taking advantage of the environment. Just in terms of policy responses, I was involved in the work of the SCDI's Rural Commission, which reported towards the end of last year. It focuses on people, place and productivity as a response to the challenges facing rural areas. There's a key issue around talent attraction and retention. Skills provision's been touched on earlier, but rural areas do offer a very high quality of life and lifestyle opportunities. In fact, it's been interesting seeing how many people have been trying to get to their second homes, as though the rural areas provide some sort of escape. Obviously, you know, second homes is a challenge, but it does illustrate that rural areas are seen as places to go, places that are away from trouble or away from difficulty. So although we have demographic challenges, we're also seen as an attractive location in rural Scotland. In terms of place, we need to see investment in a range of things. I've touched on the issue of second homes, but we need more affordable housing. Transport and connectivity remains a challenge. Not everyone has excellent broadband and mobile coverage. And so there are still needs for investment there. And then on productivity, there is a lot of innovation in rural business because of the challenges they face from their geographic location. But there's scope to support more of that, to get more value added into the supply chains in rural areas. And particularly an issue in rural economies is lower pay and gender pay issues. So fair work should become a potential issue for us all to tackle as well. So I'm already involved in recovery plans for the Murray area where I work now. We're looking at an asset-based approach, focusing on local strengths. We have a growth deal that's coming along, which should form part of that recovery. I want to make sure that in rural Scotland, recovery means that no places or people are left behind. I'm sure that's something we can all agree with right across the country. But it should be remembered that rural Scotland's a great place to live, work, study and visit. And that's my vision for the future.
Great.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Stuart. That's great. So without further ado, on to Phil, looking at the urban town centre perspective.
Thanks, Charlie, and good morning, everybody. Just before I begin my piece, I'd just like to echo Stuart's sentiment. We have a Airbnb property up in the West Highlands, and yesterday we took 5 bookings. So July and August are now completely booked out because people are looking at self-contained accommodation units. So there's parts of the economy that will unlock quicker than others. I'm going to talk a wee bit about town centres and the delivery infrastructure that we've got in place. Scotland is seen internationally as having some of the best town centre policy globally. We've got a town centre action plan, policies around town centre first, we've got the place principle, and we've been backing that up more recently with some infrastructure funding around town centre boost, etc. But truth be told, this is a fast moving piece, and town centres didn't have their troubles to seek before COVID-19. It's interesting just to see the role that the town centres are playing just now. Whilst they're obviously not open to the wider citizen population, there are still a lot of components of our town centres that are still functioning. Chemists, care sector, newsagents, grocers, supermarkets, bike shops, fast food, takeaway, delivery infrastructure and so on. So they have been feeding us on a sort of more local basis, and that's something that we have played into. I've prepared a few slides. If Ewan is able to switch to the slides, because I think I've probably got a face for radio.
Okay.
And I'm going to start specifically around our business improvement districts. We have 38 of these collaborative partnerships across the country, and roughly the same again in development. We took over delivery of this programme late November 18, and we've been 19. We've been driving forward a more expansive model. So we've been trying to provoke more tourism bids, and we see that we've now got those in Moray Speyside, Inverness, Loch Ness, Tweed Valley. So there's a growth in the T-bid There's also traditional city bids in the likes of essential Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Spard. And we've got smaller, more rural bids in places like Oban and Dunoon. We realised that having this infrastructure in place, this type of collaborative partnership, was going to be critical through recovery. So rather than the norm, which was to send out levy invoices to all of the businesses in the district, set against the context of all of the macro government interventions and grants and loans and deferrals, we agreed with COSLA to put a pause on it for 6 months. Scottish Government came up with this central fund, and it was really to build a partnership between local government and the groups within these town and city centres to come up with some resilience activity. If you want to go to the second slide, Ewan. These are just some of the initial outcomes that we've been able to achieve. I think one of the very interesting things is the virtual high street and digital markets that we've been creating. For example, in Stirlingshire, a single platform is going out very quickly that will link in not just the city of Stirling, but also the surrounding towns of Dunblane, Doon, Callander, Aberfoyle, Bridge of Allen, etc. And that will allow a lot of retailers to continue to trade. So we will launch this website, and it means people within Stirlingshire can actually get a lot of stuff delivered without having to venture into the town centre. So it's a very here and now intervention. We're also looking at green fleet delivery, so a couple of electric vans that will actually programme collection and deliveries across all of the towns to try and take a lot of existing traffic off the roads and consolidate the delivery. What we've seen, which I think has been the best outcome, has been really good local partnership. We see local government, business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, all coming together with community groups to deliver a whole range of resilience, mainly around production of PPE, helping vulnerable within their society, and just setting up platforms that allow businesses to continue to trade. So that's just a number of things I'll just flick through. They've acted as a good cascade for local government, who are really under pressure now and have done a fantastic job in terms of getting finance out to business. The bid has acted as a conduit just to cascade that further down. We're looking at support for the businesses, obviously even soft support around counselling, confidence building, close Facebook groups where they can share best practice. And now we're obviously moving into a recovery phase. Next slide, Ian, please. So believe it or not, we had actually just about been prepared to review the town centre action plan, to refresh it, to think about a greener, more sustainable, more digital future. And then COVID landed. So we've taken time, we've had a wee bit of time for a bit of deep thought. And obviously STP have been working across, we are Scotland's representative on the UK High Streets Task Force. So with our colleagues in Westminster, the Welsh Government and Irish governments, we've been sharing best practice across the four nations and taking a look at what needs to be done. And we've come up with this sort of approach. This is still to be signed off by Scottish Government, but we're moving in the right direction. A National Towns Recovery Programme. Initially, we'll launch this with a big media campaign, Love Scotland, Love Local, build on the localism and the sustainability that's already started to emerge. We'll try to amplify the positivity around High Street Heroes, focusing on what people are doing, Future Town programme, which will bring in citizens, students, wider population, architects, etc., to start sharing ideas about what the future town and High Street could look like. We will go for a recovery phase 2 fund for bids, but we're also going to widen that out to towns. So if you've got a development trust or town centre partnership, you'll be able to apply for funding and implement some recovery actions. And again, some of the bids have been very, very active in terms of social distancing markers, hand sanitising stations, PPE equipment, perspex screen installation, bringing shops out onto the street, and working with Sustrans and other around the Safer Spaces for People project to make sure that pedestrianisation and access for cycling, as well as allowing people to socially distance, is going to be the first step in trying to unlock our towns. But there's a degree of reality. If you see the phased recovery programme that the First Minister launched yesterday, we only begin to see unlock in the town centre roughly around phase 3. And at the tail end of that phase 5, we're still looking at things like theatres and cinemas and pubs, being very, very difficult to maintain social distancing. So we'll see some new models emerge. Fundamentally, though, the big thing here is the national review. We're actually going to go ahead with this. We're going to build a strategic plan that looks at what sort of better Scotland could come out of this, what sort of future-proofed high street, town centre, city centre could come out of this. And obviously that needs to be driven with a new national infrastructure fund for towns. But we're looking at things like climate action, different housing products for changing demographic. We don't build anything for old people, nothing for new people, for young people. Very much focusing on refurb and retrofit. So again, it's about a sustainable recovery. This will lead to obviously a new town centre action plan, which will push things like digital towns, healthier towns, community wealth building and local procurement. So that's given you a rough idea that we are working through resilience just now. The sentiment across our industry is that resilience will be required much longer than people are talking about, that everybody's jumping to the word recovery, and it's not going to be straightforward as just jumping into recovery. This is going to be a mixture of parallel activity, with resilience continuing well into the new year, recovery beginning to pick up in certain aspects, again, running in parallel with resilience, and then obviously renewal and restructure much further down the line. But it's a time of opportunity, and I think we've got a fantastic chance to build a better Scotland out of all of this mess.
Great. Phil, that's great. It's really, really helpful to get that update on what you're doing there. Susan, finally from the panel session, small business perspective. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so conscious of time, I'll try and race through this, and apologies if anyone's heard me say a lot of this before, conscious sounding a bit like a broken record. So I suppose a little bit like Phil, our heads are still really in the firefighting stage for small businesses at the moment, and we're obviously trying to pull together thoughts on recovery, but it's quite hard to see that future at the moment. It's quite hard to get there, but I'll cover three particular observations about the resilience phase, and then give a couple of thoughts in terms of restart and recovery. So the first point in relation to an observation about where we are now is, I suppose, there's probably never been a time in recent years when small businesses have been as appreciated as they are just now and as vital. And yet there's never been a time when they've been in more peril than they are at the moment. So why are they vital? Some of the things that Phil and Stuart have mentioned already. SMEs have been there to help us build up capacity in terms of manufacturing PPE or hand sanitizer. They've also provided a vital role in terms of offering sustainable local food supply chains. So they've offered us these goods and services that we've needed in order to help us stay at home. So a lot of small businesses trying to put services online, so whether it's beauty consultation or yoga services. So it's not just food and drink that's been trying to transition to better online services. But that said, despite those services that we're using of small businesses, it's pretty clear that they're in absolute dire straits. We do a quarterly tracker survey, and the most recent one was done just really after the first 2 weeks of the crisis. And the graph basically wouldn't go low enough for how far confidence had crashed from small businesses, which is perhaps not surprising. But in a more recent survey that we've done, probably one of the biggest surveys across the UK, so we had 800 responses in Scotland to that from small businesses, it showed that about half of small businesses had to close entirely because of the crisis. But of that half that had closed, just over a third in Scotland genuinely worried whether they would be able to reopen again. We'll start to hear a lot more as well about the preparedness of SMEs to recover in light of the debt that a lot of them have taken on. So you'll start to hear the banks talking quite a lot about this. We don't have disaggregated figures yet for Scotland about the additional CBILS and bounce back loan finance that's been taken on by SMEs in Scotland. But realistically, we're talking about minimum hundreds of millions of pounds of debt, and debt for cash flow, not for investment, that's been taken on by the SME sector. So that's quite important to bear in mind in terms of what comes next. And then if you think about what state they're in terms of restart, they're restarting with with all of these concerns about having no stock, perhaps having no cash reserves to restock, lots of concerns around employment-related issues and how we handle reopening. A second observation is, have we been measuring the right things in terms of what matters to our economy? I hear a lot of people talking now about the importance of resilience. Why a diverse economy? Why resilient supply chains with spare capacity matter and important? And that might mean we need to reflect slightly on some of our other priorities. So how we think about productivity might not always favour these new things that we might value in terms of having spare capacity and lots of different supply chains that are more resilient. And I think that if this crisis hasn't demonstrated that we need to think more broadly about what we want from our economy, then nothing will. The third observation from this stage, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's something that matters to us in the FSB in particular, is around our digital capabilities. And not just in the business sector, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that, but in public services. I think that what the rapid shift to home working and setting up lots of grant schemes has shown us is that we have neglected investment in public digital services for far too long. Some of this would have been easier if we had better systems at the back end. And I know it's not sexy or exciting, but it's something that we mustn't lose sight of as we move forward. In terms of some practical lessons for restarting the economy and recovery, very quickly on restart, this is where we're spending a lot of time at the moment in discussions with government. A lesson from the crisis and what we mustn't repeat with restart is we need to keep instructions clear and simple. We need to explain, as whether we are fellow businesses, support organisations or public sector or regulators, we need to be very clear with businesses what is expected of them. We also need to make sure that as businesses restart, that we are giving out the right messages of public reassurance. It is important that when it's safe to do so, that certain businesses are allowed to get up and running again and that we're supportive of that. So I'm sure that Stuart will be aware of some of the concerns, particularly in tourism areas, around the potential conflict between businesses in that area wanting to get back to business, but real concerns of local communities around opening back up again and having lots of people come into an area. And the third point about restart is just about how important it's going to be to work together quickly, perhaps in ways that we haven't done before. And actually what Phil said has highlighted some of the great practice that's going on out there at the moment in terms of some of the work that BIDS have been doing. But if we think about town centres, some of the issues that will very quickly need resolved there, whether it's about how we marshal all of the spatial issues in terms of pedestrian, delivery, queuing, all of the issues that are going to happen in small spaces, as well as thinking about, for example, hospitality and freeing up space for them. It's going to really require somebody to help pull everyone together and coordinate that very, very quickly. A couple of just points for recovery. There'll be more coming on this, of course, but I suppose an obvious point to make is that we need to seize the opportunities where we can, because they are relatively few and far between. A couple of ideas that we've been talking to others about, some of them have been mentioned already. So small businesses in rural areas. So as Stuart mentioned, all of the analysis suggests that these areas that were particularly reliant on hospitality and tourism for jobs will be at serious risk. Lots of micro businesses in these areas who tend to use each other as customers. So tourism, the impact, not just about tourism businesses per se, but about the huge number of small businesses who all thrive off of that and the visitor economy. So small businesses in rural areas, for example, those that need digital support to diversify, and those businesses who can offer it, who are based in those areas, how do we match them up to get that economic activity going again? How do we build upon those who found new markets and help them do it better? So what can be a catalyst for better collaborative working and sustainable logistics? So Phil mentioned it there in relation to BIDS, but we will all be aware of lots and lots of small businesses who are rapidly diversified and doing more online than they did before, and more home delivery than they did before. But it's fairly ad hoc and unsustainable. And whilst we want to keep that business, we need to make it more sustainable for the businesses. We need to think about how we can encourage that collaboration to prevent lots of individual businesses driving around our counties, getting them working better together. Also interest in innovation and diversification right now. So what support do we offer to that? And is it tilted towards the type of diversification and the type of businesses that are asking for that support at the moment? And we shouldn't lose sight of the opportunities for startups. Always an increase in people interested in starting up at crisis points like this. The last point I'll make about recovery is, again, just thinking about really challenging ourselves to think about how we coordinate our strategies and recovery plans. Again, thinking about those areas where jobs are going to be most at risk, and thinking about how we develop policy and interventions, and is it at the right level? Are we really doing it from community and ground level up? And have we got our investment in the right places, and are we doing it in the right way? So, for example, city and growth deals. Are we using all of our money on the right projects now? Is it time to think about how we could use public spending on infrastructure, on goods and services to the maximum effect? So, for example, in the way that we procure those goods and services. I'll leave it there for now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thanks to all the panel members for kicking us off so well. We had been thinking about having a couple of plenary session Q&As here. I think it might be more sensible if we just go straight into the breakout rooms now and have a conversation. So those of you that are in the rooms with the panelists can pose questions to them there, and we'll try and pull it all together when we come back into the plenary session in about 20 minutes time. So Alison, I'm going to hand over to you to say anything you want to say about the breakout rooms, but most importantly, let's get us into the breakout room. So this is where the experiment starts, folks. So bear with us. So what we're going to try and do now then is to try and just quickly capture some of, obviously not repeat all the discussion, but capture some of the discussion around reflections and what we've learned and what some of the opportunities might be. So I'm going to do this in reverse order, I think, from how we did it to begin with. And I'm going to ask Susan, if she's, I can't see Susan at the moment, I'm going to ask Susan if she's there and perhaps if we can get the main picture off Alison and on, there we go, great, that's good. Susan, so reflections from your room.
Yeah, very, very quickly. So we sort of talked in the round about on the basis of the various presentations. So on businesses in particular, there was a few remarks about how nimble small businesses had been in terms of pivoting, sorry to bring out all the cliches, pivoting to new business models, and a real feeling that this digital transformation, both in terms of business and in terms of employment habits, it really is something that will have taken hold, and we need to capitalise on that. But that will probably require us to think about additional support in that space in order to reap the benefits of that. We also spoke about the new models of delivering things and how we prepare better for crises in the future, particularly about the role of communities and community governance. Then I think I think it would be fair to say there was a bit of weariness and scepticism in our group about the state of things at the moment. So we did hear around capacity issues, particularly in local government ECDEV, where there's been a role in terms of administering immediate support to business, and that has just necessarily limited the amount of space and time to think about recovery. And there were some questions around, you know, is this the moment to really change how we do things from a policy point of view? Can we now think about how we might embed inclusive growth principles and things like fair work into business? And we posed a question around, will we try brave new policies now, or because of the crisis and the the timescales and the capacity, will we revert back to how we've always done things? And I think it would be fair to say that probably the conclusion of the group was there's never a better opportunity, but there was a bit of waniness about whether we really will overcome those challenges and really delve into new approaches. I think that's probably a decent summary of our chat.
Brilliant. Sounds like you covered a lot of ground there. That's great. Phil, your reflections from your group?
Yeah, I had a lot of smart people in my room. This was great. They helped me no end with the review. I think a lot of what came out was around, there's been some rhetoric by government about inclusiveness and about fairness, but it has not really manipulated right through to the real economy and to policy. So our room really wanted an underpinning economic framework that could push things and embed things like community wealth, the green agenda, a healthier, more inclusive economy. So less rhetoric and let's just get this driven into policy. You know, there was talk about there will be the need to tax the digital economy. Currently, no one gets any benefit from that other than Amazon, eBay and Google. So how do we do that to rebalance clicks versus bricks in our physical places? Big opportunity. Municipalities, local government can really step up to the plate, and if they use their imagination and some of the central resource, for example, towns are going to be included in the National Plan 4 framework. They're going to be included in the National Infrastructure Plan. So now, if you look at the agglomeration effect of potential investments around green and housing and digital in our towns, you know, the national picture, it builds up very, very quickly if we see that scaled up. So why not allow pension funds, you know, the public sector pension funds to go in whenever property values are so low and distressed, to do normally what the speculators do, to go in and sweep up the property, take control of it for a period of time, to repurpose it into a much more imaginative and citizen-based solution. And that can be passed on eventually to social enterprise and to local startups, etc. But you're building in what the population wants rather than taking what developers, what your ubiquitous, every clone town look the same thing. We can take a much more place-based approach. But the key theme, I suppose, is national policy from central government and a much more radical approach by local government in partnership to repiece the high street, the town centre, the city centre.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Great. Stuart, on the rural side of things.
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion really focusing on the value of small companies to the rural economy and the connectedness that they have with communities, and particularly important that agencies listen to the needs and concerns of small business at the moment. A bit of a discussion about how that was done, whether if agencies were contacting lots of small businesses, whether they would feel that was worthwhile. The business is dealing with a crisis. Do they want to speak to an official from government? On the other hand, the use of intermediaries such as Susan's organisation, FSB, Chambers of Commerce, to channel through concerns from small companies. A bit of a feeling that the new funds that are available, the Pivotal Enterprise Fund, for example, might not go to the very smallest business. And I was illustrating how in my own context, we're looking at businesses in the likes of Elgin or Buckie, some of our towns, which are employing 3 or 4 people very differently from ones that are employing 3 or 4 people up in a rural area like Dufftown or Tom and Towel. So there isn't a sort of one size fits all. And then discussion as well from you and from Scottish Enterprise and myself as well, agencies working very differently, working closely with government wanting to get help down to the grassroots, small companies being asked to identify gaps, but there is a finite pool of resources at the moment, so there are tough choices to be made. But I think coming out of this, a different way of working between Business Gateway and between the main agencies, South of Scotland, Highlands and Islands and Scottish Enterprise, to try and fill that gap that sometimes exists in the middle between the micro enterprises and the businesses that are growing to scale. So I think a return to some more general approach to rural development that doesn't just focus on a narrow number of businesses, but tries to help businesses more generally, particularly with things like getting online and trading through e-commerce. A good discussion. The brutality of the 30-second countdown wasn't missed on the chairman, so I didn't enable everyone to get in, but we had a good discussion, and I hope that gives a flavour of it. So thanks for everyone who contributed.
Great, thank you, Stuart, thank you. And Taylor, yes, do you want to summarise the conversation in our room?
Yeah, no problem. So some similar themes coming through there. I did have these in a certain order, but picking up one of the last themes that Stuart spoke about there, challenges from a sort of funding perspective, which the other sort of chairs have fed back on there. And from a skills perspective, certainly that need for much more innovation and creativity for employers, because we know the funding challenges just can't be sustained in the long term. We also had some discussion around how we can support employers from a leadership and management perspective, and what are their requirements. An emphasis coming from the college sector, they're starting to talk to employers about what are their requirements in the short term. So would they need to change the type of courses, shorter courses, snappier courses, which also led us into discussion around the sort of delivery models, and that balance between digital delivery and potential digital exclusion, which has been coming through. And then I guess the final element was around from the skills perspective, that any recovery that's going to be put in place has to be sort of led from a skills perspective, to make sure that we're supporting individuals as well as supporting businesses in terms of what their requirements are.
Great, thank you. Thank you all, panelists and people in the rooms for your ideas, and for the panelists being so succinct in summing them up. So what are we taking away from that? Well, it sounds like times are obviously very tough and people are struggling to make it through it, but there are a number of opportunities on which we can build as we move into the recovery phase, and there's some real food for thought there, which ties in quite nicely with what we're thinking about for the next conversation, which is around the whole theme of taking a slightly more futures look at it, working on the Scottish Enterprise scenarios model, and getting some input and discussion around that. And also Fraser Rounder recently published a paper by Andrew Gowdy. So looking at some of the future aspects as well. So I think the next conversation is going to be more futures focused. The one after that, the idea that we're playing around with is to look at what lessons can be learned from how things are being done in other parts of Europe as well. And so these are the two ideas that we have. The next session is going to be on the 12th of June, and the one after that on the 3rd of July. Is that right? I can see Alison nodding, so that's excellent. Okay, so what we're going to do next is have a very quick poll using the polling mechanism. Alison, you're going to talk us through that? Here we go.
Yep. Unfortunately, this is a case of digital exclusion, so those on the phone won't be able to see this, obviously, but on your screens just now, you'll have a short poll of 3 questions, and it would be really useful for us for future sessions and learning that EDAS can provide. And
this is not just around the COVID conversations. This is all about. This is also around the community of inclusive growth and sustainable growth community of practice area as well. So, and you can vote for more than one thing. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll just keep that up on the screen for a few more minutes, and I can also circulate around to everyone that's registered for the event. Our team has also been taking notes of this, and we will be circulating a post-event report of this conversation session.
Okay, so it looks like 22 of, well, that's coming in fast. Can hosts vote in this, Alison?
I'm not sure. Does it say that you
can actually?
No, looks like you can. Also, just to say for those that are dialing in, it'd be really useful if you had any comments or questions, please do email me at alison@edas.org.uk.
Okay, so we've got nearly everybody has replied now. Looks like the circular green economy is popular. Panel of mixed voices. Yeah, excellent. All right, good. Well, we'll reflect on those as we plan future events. That's very helpful. We're getting close to 1:15 now, so I think it only remains for me to remind you the next session, next COVID conversation is on the 12th of June, same time, same place. And to thank Alison, Elaine, Jennifer and Ewan for their help in pulling the technology and everything, support for this together. And thank the panelists for their contributions as well. And to all of you for participating. So yes. Safe home, as they say, but thank you. See you on the 12th of June.